Have you ever thought about how the first paragraph of a country's constitution, something that could easily be dismissed as just a preface, could actually become its most powerful legal shield? Well, today, we're going to trace that exact journey. We're talking about the incredible evolution of the preamble to the Indian Constitution, from a simple introduction to the very soul of the nation's law.
It all really started with this powerful metaphor. Back in 1960, the Supreme Court described the preamble as a key, a way to unlock what the framers of the Constitution were thinking. Now, that's a really useful tool for sure, but think about it. A key gets you in the door, but it isn't the house itself, right? And that single idea set the stage for a huge, decades-long debate about the preamble's real authority.
So, here's our game plan. We'll start with the basics, what the preamble is and its four main pillars. Then we'll dive right into the legal drama, from when the preamble's place was questioned to the moment it was declared supreme. We'll even see how it helps balance our rights, and then we'll wrap up by looking at its incredible, enduring power.
So, what exactly is a preamble anyway? Honestly, the best way to think of it is as the soul of the Constitution. It's that first, big statement that lays out all the core values, the philosophy, and the ultimate goals of the entire document. It's really the gateway through which we understand everything else that follows.
You know, the preamble itself is built on what you could call four foundational pillars. Each one answers a really critical question. First, where does the Constitution get its power from? Second, what kind of country is India meant to be? Third, what are its biggest goals? And finally, when did this grand vision officially come into being?
And here are those answers, laid out like a blueprint for a nation. The ultimate source of authority, it's not a king, it's not a parliament, it's we the people. The nature of the state is captured in those five powerful words: sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, and republic. The objectives are absolutely profound: to secure justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity for everyone. And the date, November 26, 1949, marks the day it was all formally adopted.
Okay, so this brings us to the first big legal test. I mean, all those ideals in the preamble sound amazing, but the real question was, were they legally enforceable? And that question came to a head in a case that involved giving away a piece of Indian territory.
The case was, as you see on screen, in re Berubari Union and exchange of enclaves, all the way back in 1960. The Supreme Court was essentially asked if the Parliament had the power to hand over a piece of Indian land to Pakistan, just based on an agreement.
And to answer that, the court had to tackle an even bigger question. Is the preamble actually part of the Constitution, or is it just a fancy, decorative introduction? The entire legal weight of the preamble hung on this one question. And in 1960, the court gave its verdict. They decided that, yes, the preamble was a very useful key for understanding the document, but, and this is a huge but, it was not an enforceable part of the Constitution. This was a major blow. It basically pushed the preamble to the sidelines and seriously limited its legal power.
But hold on, because that was so not the end of the story. Just 13 years later, a landmark case came along that didn't just challenge this ruling, it completely revolutionized Indian constitutional law as we know it.
This is the big one, the celebrated case of Kesavananda Bharati versus the state of Kerala from 1973. This case tackled the ultimate question of Parliament's power. Could the Parliament amend any part of the Constitution it wanted, even our fundamental rights?
In a stunning move, the Supreme Court did a complete 180. A massive 13-judge bench explicitly overruled the Berubari decision. They declared without a doubt that the preamble is an integral part of the Constitution. And their reasoning? Simple. It was debated and passed by the Constituent Assembly just like every other article.
And out of this historic verdict came one of the most important legal principles in the world, the Basic Structure Doctrine. Okay, imagine the Constitution is a house. The court basically said, Parliament, you can renovate the rooms, you can paint the walls, you can amend the articles, but you cannot, under any circumstances, demolish the foundation or the main load-bearing walls. And those core elements, that basic structure, are the ideals found right in the preamble, like democracy, secularism, and the rule of law. They were now officially untouchable.
All right, so the preamble is now officially the core of the Constitution. It's powerful. So, what happens next? How does this newfound power actually work in the real world? Well, the next major test came at a case that set up a head-on collision between our individual freedoms and the state's goals for social welfare.
This brings us to the case of Minerva Mills versus the Union of India from 1980.
At its heart, this was a battle to define the balance of power between two absolutely crucial parts of the Constitution. It was a real clash of titans.
So on one side, you have Part 3, which contains our fundamental rights, things like freedom of speech and the right to equality. Think of this as a shield that protects you as a citizen. On the other side, you have Part 4, the directive principles. This is like a compass that guides the government toward creating a more just society. But what happens when that shield and that compass seem to be pointing in completely different directions?
Well, the conflict was ignited by the very controversial 42nd Amendment. This amendment expanded Article 31C, and its goal was to give all directive principles total superiority over our fundamental rights. The government was essentially arguing that in order to achieve its social goals, like those in Article 39B and C related to distributing resources, it could override an individual's basic freedoms.
But the Supreme Court disagreed, and they did so powerfully. In their judgment, the court said that giving total primacy to one over the other would, and I'm quoting here, destroy the bedrock of balance that is absolutely essential to the Constitution. They said the two parts have to work together in harmony.
And so, the verdict was crystal clear. The court struck down that part of the amendment, ruling that the balance, the harmony, between fundamental rights and directive principles is itself a part of the basic structure. This decision was a huge win for the Preamble's ideals, reinforcing that you can't have justice at the expense of liberty, or vice versa.
All right, let's bring this all full circle. It's been quite a journey, right? From a simple key to the very soul of the Constitution. Let's do a quick recap of the key takeaways from the Preamble's incredible story.
So, what is the Preamble's real power today? First off, it's the Constitution's entire philosophical bedrock, with its authority flowing directly from we the people. It clearly defines India's identity: a sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic republic. Its core mission is to secure justice, liberty, equality, and fraternity for all. And maybe most critically, thanks to that landmark Kesavananda Bharati case, it is not just a fancy intro. Its core principles are the unamendable basic structure of the entire Constitution.
And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. Given that these values in the Preamble are the absolute bedrock of the nation's law, which one of these core identity words, sovereign, socialist, secular, democratic, or republic, do you think is the most critical for defining India here in the 21st century? It's definitely something worth thinking about.